is. So I don't forget it.
Yeah.
I usually leave it on my desk and then have to beg somebody to let me back in.
Yeah. Is Bill not coming back?
Yeah, he'll be back. He's just late.
He's going to be here probably in about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to call the January 14th, 2019 City Council study session to order. And we will start with roll call.
Deputy Mayor Palooza,
He's going to be here shortly.
Councilmember Baggett,
Here.
Councilmember Brown,
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey,
Here.
Councilmember Holman,
Here.
Councilmember Troutman-Well,
Here.
Councilmember Wales.
Here. Let's move into announcements, reports, presentations. Anything that needs to be added? Okay, thank you. Then we'll move into our agenda. Agenda items for council discussion, number A, Roman numeral, or A, resolution for the 2019 LTAC approval.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Doug Lean, Manager Economic Development for the Auburn Lodging Tax and Tourism Board. Tonight in front you have a proposed resolution, and it is the annual recommendations by the LTAC Board for distribution of grants to nonprofit organizations for the promotion of tourism activity that would deem that would put heads in beds and bring tourism retail dollars into the Auburn market for economic development gain. There's two that have been approved so far. One event is for the Veterans Day Parade put on by our Parks Department in the amount of $3,500. And then Pet Palooza, also put on by our Parks Department for $5,000. So tonight the ask is that you would approve these two grants. And I will tell you that we did not, the LTAC Board did not grant out all the dollars that were budgeted. So we've reopened the application process for additional nonprofit application, and we'll be back to you probably later in the spring with those recommendations.
Any questions from the council? Doug, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing this at the council meeting on Tuesday of next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move into item B, resolution number 5395, 2019 VRFA fee schedule.
Good evening, council members, mayor, deputy mayor, or seated
Whatever.
deputy mayor.
Sub, I'm the sub.
My name is Jeff Tate, Director of Community Development for the City of Auburn, and to my left is Karen Stewart, who's the Fire Marshal for the Valley Regional Fire Authority. Resolution 5395 is a resolution that has been before you in prior years, which is to propose annual fee increases for services provided by Valley Regional Fire Authority. Just a quick reminder, and probably for the record, VRFA is a separate agency from the city. The city collects, though, on VRFA's behalf, a number of fees, primarily in the arena of development review, business licensing, projects, permits, things of that nature. And that concept is really to ensure that our customers experience a one-stop customer service permit stop, so that we're not sending our same customers over to VRFA to submit fire permit applications. What Resolution 5395 proposes is to increase VRFA service fees by 3.6%, which is really reflecting CPI adjustment for this region. And the proposed fees have already been before the VRFA Governance Board back on November 8th, 2018, and were approved by the Governance Board. But as has been done in years past, that recommendation from the Governance Board comes to City of Auburn, so that we can make a determination to incorporate VRFA fees into the city's fee schedule as well. If you have any questions, myself or Karen are happy to answer any of those questions. What we're seeking is to schedule Resolution 5395 before City Council next Tuesday, January 22nd for action.
Councilmember Troutman.
I just had a question. As I was going over this and reviewing on the fire sprinklers inspections, how do you figure out the cost and everything by square footage, or for them to have sprinklers in there? What's the smallest or the biggest space?
Well, what happens is, as you look at sprinklered buildings, in a room, you may have one sprinkler system, or one sprinkler head, you may have 5. And so, instead of basing off of square footage, we base it off of the number of heads. So you'll see a per device cost, and that per device cost is because a huge warehouse is gonna have hundreds of sprinkler heads, where a smaller space is gonna have 5. So it's based off of that.
Okay, all right.
That make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Was part of the question too, what size of building actually triggers a
Well,
sprinkler requirement?
that, you know, like sometimes there are daycare centers that are in home, and some of them required to have sprinklers. So that was where I was coming from. I should have said that to begin with. How do you, what's the space of where they have to have the sprinklers? Is there a code or something that they have to go by?
Yes, Washington State regulates daycares. And in daycares, once you're over a certain size, and I would have to go to my code book to find out what that is, and that size is number of kids,
Okay.
then you're kicked into having or required to have a sprinkler
Okay,
system.
so this is similar to what you do with these big buildings and small buildings.
Absolutely, and they would be charged off of what it costs per head,
Okay.
you know, for that house.
Yeah. Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
Councilmember Baggett.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Do we really know what the fire benefit charge is going to be for this year?
The fire benefit charge just went out Thursday or today. I'm not positive, and I do not know that answer.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll look forward to seeing this at our Tuesday meeting. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, ordinance XXXX, identity theft, and we have our city attorney, Mr. Gross, or Attorney Gross.
Thank you, Councilmember. This is back from last year. We've looked at some issues. I've talked to some of you about some of your individual questions about this. And again, as a refresher, what this does is it adopts the state statute for identity theft as a city code that allows our police officers to charge that directly. What the problem that this is designed to solve is in the circumstances where King County doesn't charge it as a felony for some reason, declines it, comes back to us, it makes it a little bit easier for my prosecutors to charge the case and to explain it to a jury as being identity theft, not as an attempt. Happy to try to answer any other questions you may have.
Councilmember Troutman.
I have a issue that just arose. You know that my purse got stolen last summer. Well, this happened just 2 days ago. My husband received a phone call from Citibank, and somebody has hit one of our credit cards in West Virginia, Florida, and 2 other places. And they called my husband and asked him, is this you making all these charges? And he says, no, I'm sitting in my living room in Auburn, Washington. So somehow or another, they have stolen my husband's credit card, and they're using it all over the place. And that's why I'm having an issue with this identity theft thing, because of how we're being affected. And I'm constantly also still getting calls asking if we're the ones that are spending money or applying for application, and it's not us. And with this, us having to reduce just to become a misdemeanor, identity theft, I have an issue with it.
And I understand that. I'm sorry you all are still having problems with this. Let me sort of go back again and talk again about what happens with one of these cases. Police detectives will do the investigation. They'll say this appears to be identity theft. And because it's a felony, they'll ship it off to the King County Prosecutor's Office. Under their filing guidelines, one of two things is going to happen. If the dollar value is under $1,000, and unless this is a long pattern or there appear to be a repeat offender or there appears to be multiple victims, the county is just going to decline it and send it back down to us. And that process can take several months. So there can be several months from when the police department reports something to the county before the county sends it back, and only then can we get them into our court system. The other thing that came out fairly recently, I think since the last time we talked, is even when the county does keep the charge because it's over $1,000, what they will be doing if they don't decline it, if it's between $1,000 and $5,000, they won't file it as a felony because it takes them so long and they have so many other felony cases to deal with. They're going to do what's called an expedited filing, where they will file it in district court as an attempt instead of as an identity theft. So I hear what you're saying, but what my police department and what my prosecutors are telling me is if our detectives know what the filing guidelines are going to be, generally speaking, and they can see that, they can refer it directly over to us. And with this change, we can charge directly as identity theft as opposed to having to do it as an attempt. So their thinking is this is going to speed up the processing time between the police department finishing their investigation and our prosecutors being able to get them in front of a judge. So our recommendation, and I don't know if Commander Stalker's had a chance to talk to the chief, but the last time I talked to the chief, is that the police department and city attorney's recommendation is that council adopt this.
Councilmember Holman and then Councilmember Brown.
I am very much in favor of this. The more tools that we can give our city prosecutor and our police officers, the happier I am. This won't mean less felony identity theft cases. What it will mean is a faster processing time and less likelihood of a jury misunderstanding what attempted identity theft is. And so it makes it a little more direct and positive. It's a great tool.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes, thank you. Actually, my question is, with this expedited process, does it have the potential for reducing the incidents, number of incidents going forward, in that a defendant could potentially be involved in a prosecution quicker and perhaps drawing their attention away from more criminal behavior?
Okay, so the county's expedited filing process, I don't know the answer to that. But if your question is, does allowing our detectives to get it to our prosecutors more quickly to charge under our code, we'll at least get them in front of a judge and we'll be able to make the argument about bail, bail conditions, no bail, and keep them in jail until trial. So
That was kind of my question.
the answer is we would hope so.
Okay.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So I have a question and a statement. And you've heard my constant discussions with this over the past meetings we've had. Overall, I can support this, but I also want to have a caveat in there related to the dollar amount. So the question is, 1,000, 5,000, which you mentioned, is that something that we can still handle under this, or is that just kind of in limbo?
We would only be doing it in many cases if the higher dollar amounts would be one of those things where the detectives would look at pushing the county a little bit more to file instead of declining or bringing it directly over to us.
Okay, that's perfect, because my comment is that although we can't control what the county prosecutor does or will do, I think it's still all in our best interest to do the best we can to encourage them, use the word again, to do their job. We understand they have less prosecutors they've had in the past. Their workloads are much higher, but as Councilmember Trout-Manuel just mentioned, as you well know, and the police department knows, these folks out there are just preying on victims all the time. They know how to do it. their sophisticated computer programs, whatever they use, whatever tools they use, in just a matter of minutes, they can gather the information and, like we just had, charge all over the country. And in many cases, those people are never to be found. There's always a ringleader, we know that, but there's usually not found. So yes, I think in doing this to put some teeth into it, but also making sure that all of us, and I intend to do this week at one of my other meetings, is talking to county council and talking to the county executive and doing whatever we can do to emphasize to them the importance of trying to protect victims who have nowhere to turn once this happens. And as you've heard me say before, for my wife and I, it was years before we were finally able to somewhat recover, and a lot of pain and suffering through that process. So I appreciate this, but again, we need to work a little harder with the county. Thank you.
Okay, I saved my comment for last, or question. Over the last couple of months, have we been studying this issue? My question has been, how many times roughly does this happen? I mean, is this a frequent offense, or the numbers? What are the numbers? And I think that we're to the point where this is going to be probably moved forward on Tuesday. So if it is approved, could you possibly keep track of our own data for me for the next year, or when we get to the point, if it's approved and it's implemented for a year period, so we can see how frequent this really does happen?
Absolutely.
Any other questions before we move on? Thank you very much for
Thank you.
your presentation. We're now going to go look at, and maybe it would be best, we have an ad hoc council seating group. And maybe, John, would you like to speak to the...
I would. I'd request that we, since the chair of that ad hoc committee will be here later, that perhaps we move it later on in the discussion, table it for however long it takes, and then take it up when Deputy Mayor Pelosi comes back so that he can guide us through it.
I think we all feel comfortable with that idea, so I'm going to move over to my assigned little seat and turn this over to Public Works and Community Development.
That's me.
Good.
That's why I'm sitting next to you.
Oh, is that? I thought you were the mayor.
No. Thank you. Okay, well, we will move into item 4A to start with, our capital project status report. Ryan?
Thank you very much, council members, Mayor Dacus. For the record, my name is Ryan Bondrak. I'm the Capital and Construction Engineering Manager for the city. And to my left, we have Matt Larson, the Senior Project Engineer. We're here to give you an update on the status of our capital projects. So we'll just get right into it. First things first, we kind of want to give you a briefing on our 2018 statistics. We had this information recently posted in the Auburn Magazine. But to kind of recap some of that information, we had 20 projects that either continued construction in 2018 or began construction in 2018. The total value of that was around $29 million. We reconstructed over 30 lane miles of new pavement, replaced over 7,000 miles of new water main, over 11,000 feet of new storm, 400 feet of sanitary sewer pipe. We also installed 8 new or replaced complete traffic signal systems. And then we also installed some various other signal improvements, including flashing yellow beacon signals and some additional redundant signal heads. And then we also installed over 14,000 linear feet of new or replaced sidewalks, which equates to about 2.5 miles, and constructed our first roundabout in the valley floor, which we're really excited about, at 22nd and I Street. So that's kind of our highlights for the 2018 year. We look forward to a great 2019 year. We have a number of significant projects that are going to be going out to construction. Currently, we have 39 active projects that we're working on that are totaling about 55 million. Of those 39 projects, 27 of them are in design phase and 12 are still in construction. Over the course of the next couple months, you're gonna see about 5 projects go into the construction phase. Some upcoming projects that are not currently in the report, but you're gonna see on the next report are the Lake Tapps Parkway ITS expansion project, both Phase 2 and Phase 3 of the Auburn Way North preservation project. Those 2 projects are exciting because they're gonna finish the Auburn Way corridor from essentially SR 18 all the way up to 277th as far as the pavement preservation is concerned. And then we all have the 2019 arterial patch and overlay project. 3 of these projects, the top 3, you're gonna see they have federal funds, and there's gonna be a resolution at the January 22nd council to accept the federal grants for those projects. So to get in the actual report, we had a request recently to kind of go over, how this report is actually laid out. So thought we would kind of go column by column and just kind of briefly state kind of what each column kind of means. So the first column on the left is the city's project number, and you'll notice it's, so the top one up there, CP 1605, the first 2 numbers after the CP, it stands for capital project, and then 16 is the year that project started when we initiated a project. So that was in 2016 that project was initiated. And then the 05 that was the 5th project that was initiated that year. So that's kind of how each of those numbers, what those numbers mean. Next column over is the project name and then a short description of what that project is. The next 4 columns all deal with budget. So the first column, you have the total cost that are in the total budget for the project that are allocated or that are coming from either street funds or utility funds. Then the middle column there is any other funds that are in the project, either a grant, state grant, federal grant, parks money, facilities money, any of that type of thing. And then you have the total budget on that project. So kind of added up the first 2 columns. And then the 4th column is the total estimated cost of what we believe the project's gonna take to construct. Then the next 2 columns, you have the design phase portion of the project. So you have a % complete, and then you have a finish date. The % complete is a projection on what we feel the project is at. So if it's in construction, it's gonna be 100%, but if we're in a traditional 30, 60, 90% design, then you're gonna see some varied number in there of approximately what % complete we're at in that. The finish date is by quarter. So in the very first project there, Let's Go Lighted Crescent project, the design finished in the winter of 2018. So it's the finish date of the design. Then the next 2 columns are the % complete and finish date for construction. So the first few pages on the report are all the projects that are in construction. So you're going to see, most likely, you're going to see something less than 100% there because they're in construction at that particular time. And then the finish date is also by quarter, and that's when the project, we expect the project to be physically, or the actual completion date of the project. So all the paperwork is done and the project is complete. Then you have the project manager, who the project manager is our group. We have 5 active project managers currently. So typically you're going to see one of those 5 members on there. And then you have the status column. So the status column, we're going to give you a brief description of what's currently going on the project at any given, or at that particular time during the month the report is issued. When you go on the city's website and use the interactive viewer and you print the report, at any given time that column may be updated. Actually, any of these columns may be updated because we're actively going in there all the time and updating this information. So the status may change. That's the one that changes the most because we're trying to give an accurate description of what's going on the project. Then you have the design consultant. That column lists who the city has contracted with to help out with the design, either partially or fully. Sometimes we do all, or a lot of the design in-house, but sometimes we use consultants. We have a consultant name there. And then if the project's in construction, who the contractor is. So that's kind of a brief overview of what all those columns mean. That being said, we'll kind of go typical fashion and just go kind of page by page. If you guys have any questions, let us know. So first page.
Deputy Mayor?
Yolanda Trout Manuel and I, council member, we use this a lot in the senior center, with the senior citizens. You know, they always are asking us, what are they doing over here? What's all they're digging up things and over here, over there? And this is a wonderful tool that we use. And we even give them copies if they want. And so they spread the good word of the good staff work that we're doing in engineering and all the different projects that we're doing. And, and I use it myself because it's always good to know the budget, where the monies are coming from. Is this all city funding? Is it federal grant money? Is it any other money? And so ever since you guys put this together, this has been a marvelous tool. And I hope that the council uses it that way as well, because it really is informative.
Save this one.
Thank you.
Councilmember Trout
I
Manuel?
just have a statement. Thank you for starting out telling us what the CP and the year and the numbers was, because I was always wondering, what is that?
Yeah.
So thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah, you will see every so often an MS on there as well, and that is just miscellaneous. So it's just not one of the capital projects, but you'll see MS, but it's still the same numbering system. It'll say 18, 11, so the 18 is the year that it started, and then
Right.
11 is the 11th project of that particular year.
Thank you for clearing that up.
So the last project on the first sheet is the 277th Preservation Project, and that project is wrapping up. I have a couple photos of that particular project. It came out beautiful, so hopefully you guys are using that corridor, and drives really nice and ties right into the other 277th project that we just finished up. So. The second page, any questions on the second page?
Councilmember Trout
Just a
Manuel?
comment. Thank you for the doggy park. That it may be, you said on here, it may be a doggy's park, correct? The first item?
Oh, yeah, that's the intent of once that building gets demolished.
That would be really nice, because I know that there's a lot of people that walk their dogs over there, and I'll start walking mine over there too, if you do that. Thank you.
Any questions on page 2? The last project, actually, yeah, the last project on page 2 is 37 Southeast and A Street Signal Project, and that project, that signal, the signal is up and running and working great. Most of the work is complete. We just got to wait for the paving season to pop up so we can finish paving the corridor within that project zone, but the signal came out beautiful. Page 3 of 9. Any questions?
Just a comment on that one for me, Ryan, on the CP 1513. Councilmember Van and both myself, we travel that quite often, and that roundabout has worked out extraordinarily well. You see a lot of people that really are understanding how to use a roundabout, and it really made that traffic flow. that intersection much improved, so it's a great job.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Any other questions on 3?
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Digan.
Just a further comment, what Councilmember DeCoursey said. We've noticed it has really worked very well, and for the roundabout there at 22nd and I Street, there's still a lot of people that are rushing through there. They don't bother to stop, but I think it's more of a learning experience. I've only seen just a little bit of glass out there in the roundabout at one time. But other than that, I think that it's just a learning experience, and I think everybody, including the residents in that area, are just going to have to get used to it. But I think it's done a lot to speed the traffic flow through both directions. Thank you.
Page 4 of 9.
Councilmember Troutman?
I just have a comment on CP 114. There's, my husband works for WashDOT, and there was a sign that was still left up there that says construction. So he thought it was the state, so they came out and they took it out, but they said it belongs to the city, and it's just laying there on the ground.
Well, you know where that's at?
Yeah, it's right there by where the police station is, right there on the main road. Is that?
Are you talking, oh, you're talking about the old bank.
Yeah, the old bank, what, Key
The-
Bank, was that Key
The
Bank?
substation for
Okay.
Muckleshoot.
Oh, up by Dogwood?
Well, it's past,
Fur.
it's further, a little
It's
further
Fur.
up. Hemlock, I believe, is between Hemlock and
Okay.
164.
I think it's Fur.
Fur? Is it Fur? Okay. So I just was letting you folks know. Okay.
Any questions on page 4 of 9? Okay. Page 5 of 9.
Councilmember Troutman?
I have another comment. On CP 1814, you guys have put a mini roundabout in
Right
that.
there, actually, I got a picture for you.
Yes, I have been talking to people up there, and they're so excited because it has stopped the speeding, and people are going slower, and people can walk around there without being, afraid of getting hit. So thank you for doing that. It works really well.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions on 5 of 9?
On CP 1516, on the airport improvement, where are we with FHA on that currently? FAA.
On the actual project itself?
Yeah.
So we're currently working with an appraiser on the property acquisition phase of that project, which is part of MS 1811. That's currently where working on getting that appraisal review done so that we can get the purchase done. Outside of that, Jacob, do you know? anything else you wanna-
So yeah, the project design is underway, so it's just getting kicked off. We're about 2.5 weeks into it, so it's very conceptual at this point. We just had a meeting with the FAA, which our contacts are still there working, which is good, so we can move forward. But yeah, just conceptual design work right now, and the property acquisition that Ryan's talked about will support the runway extension, but they're happening in parallel, so one can happen before the other.
And we're still looking at not the full runway extension, but the portion of it. It was less footage that was
Yeah, it's not 4,000
not 4,000, right?
feet, it's 3,840.
38
38.
and change.
3,840.
Okay, how about page 6 of 9? Seven of 9? about 8 of 9. Lastly, 9 of 9. One thing I wanted to point out on page 9 of 9 is the Lee Hill Road corridor study. We have a public open house this week. It is scheduled for January 16th from 3 to 7 up at the Rainier Middle School in the Commons. So we're excited about that, and put out a lot of flyers out there, so we hope to see some people get excited about that particular study that we're doing.
What time will that meeting be?
It's from 3 to 7. It's a drop-in event, so people just come and go. We're going to have a bunch of display boards and interactive things that people can write down comments and give us their opinion on what kind of the issues are along that corridor.
Councilmember Trump Manuel?
On CP 1823 on 9, at the top one, you have on here at 7 sites throughout the city. Which are those?
They are scattered throughout the city. Do you have the, I don't have the info here. I don't have the current info. I can certainly provide you that information.
That's just interesting.
You know what, actually, what I'll do is for the next report, I'll list the sites on there. How about that?
Okay. so-
And it's gonna come out in about a week and a half, sometime after around the 25th.
Okay.
So I'll just add those on there.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ryan?
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time.
The next item is our heritage site update. Mr. Tate.
Good evening, council members, deputy mayor, and mayor. I'm Jason Crum, Development Services Manager for the Department of Community Development. And the Public Works and Community Development Special Focus Area Chair, Councilmember DeCoursey, requested a reoccurring update on the heritage building. So we have prepared a memo that appears on page 33 of your packet. And I'm going to briefly go through some of the contents of that memo to bring everyone up to speed. And then further updates will be provided in the future in some form as developments occur. So the first part of that memo is just a chronology of events, major events from our perspective over the last year plus since the fire. And there are some elements that were bolded, and those were to highlight some events where the city had established a deadline for the owner to kind of move forward with completion of demo work and move on with the development or redevelopment, in which they failed to meet those timelines. The most recent one was October 31st, 2018, to complete out the demo work and stabilize the site, and that was not met. And so the most recent entry at the bottom on page 34 was November 7th, 2018, and that is when our code enforcement issued a notice of civil penalty for failure to meet the conditions of that demolition work. And so those penalties continue to accrue at a rate of $100 a day, and as of today have accrued to $6,200. So that's the first section of the memo. The next section goes into the current status of the demo, the redevelopment, and I'll talk a little bit later about the schedule. So it's probably not going to notice that the demolition work started in September, and they've made some pretty good progress bringing the building down, and then it went on hold, and it kind of remains in that same state today. incomplete. So what we are waiting for from a demolition closeout perspective, there's an Appendix A which lists many of the conditions of approval that were part of that demolition scope. But in brief, we were waiting for the owner's contractor to remove all the debris that still remains on the site, fill in the site, and then stabilize it with some kind of surfacing, gravel or grass seed of some kind, and just get it stabilized and ready for redevelopment, so it's not a nuisance or a hazard or a drainage issue. And then finally restore any of the public elements that were damaged during the event or during the demolition. So those are kind of the main points that we're waiting for. Not on here because there's been some real recent developments since this memo was drafted, is that the owner has hired a new contractor to come on board and do that kind of final demolition work, removal of that debris, and filling of the site. So we got those applications late last week, one Thursday and one Friday. Those have been routed out for review, and we expect to issue those within the next couple of days. And that contractor, I just spoke to him at 5 this evening, said that they intend to move forward with that work as early as the first part of next week. And they don't expect it to take more than a week, at most maybe 2 weeks. So hopefully by the end of this month, shortly thereafter, we will see that site kind of start to get buttoned up and kind of stable where we want to see it.
Jason, question is, the lien has been filed? It says this type of financial penalty is filed as a lien against the property, so the lien has been filed?
I don't know if we've accrued the fees. I don't know if we've filed the lien. Jeff, do you know?
The initial lien has been filed, but we continue to file more liens as they continue to accrue. So we usually do that once every month.
Okay, so the lien process is you file an initial lien. As the penalties grow, you file additional liens?
Right.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
That's right.
Deputy Mayor,
When we find a site within the city and the owner isn't cooperating, we go in sometimes, right? City? Have we thought of doing that for this site?
To move forward with abatement?
Pardon me?
To move forward with abatement? Is that what you're asking?
No.
Yeah, we have considered it. And it's been a long process working with that owner. And I think every step of the way, we've sort of had some indication that they were moving forward. And most recently, I'll get into it, the owners hired an architect and a design team to go forward with the redevelopment. So we continue to have a reason to believe that they are going to follow through. But it is something that we've discussed and kind of weighed the pros and cons.
I read through this. You guys did a great job of chronologically laying out. It's quite involved. And from a logic standpoint of view, you guys have done a great job of tracking. So do we have a mandate on them to clean that property up?
Yeah.
What date is that?
So the last date we established was October 31st, but October 31st of last year. And that's why we've moved towards starting to assess those fines and lien the property. But again, we've had kind of more recent conversations which lead us to believe that the owner is going to follow through and move forward with finishing that work within the next couple of weeks.
And if they don't?
And if they don't,
Take further action.
So maybe one thing that I can add, as Jason oversees the demolition activity and the permitting and the conditions, then I supervise the code enforcement staff. So maybe I'll just kind of cut to the chase on where we're at with code enforcement. So we go through progressive code enforcement steps. So we start with a kinder, gentler approach, and then we get more serious and more serious as there are deficiencies or failures to meet deadlines. And that notice of civil penalty that initiated the fining was a kind of one of the first more severe steps that we've taken. And there are two other steps that we can take. One is to start issuing civil tickets. Essentially, we have the authority to issue a ticket for every violation that exists each day that it exists. So pretty quickly you can start racking up a lot of tickets. And tickets are issued just like traffic tickets, where it's a $250 fine, and each offense is its own ticket. And that starts moving itself through the court process if someone wants to appeal those. The other action is the abatement action. That is probably the most severe action to take, because we're going to go in at that point and we're going to spend city money to do the job, and we have to pay prevailing wages, and it's going to be a more expensive job if we do that. I'd just say that I characterize this owner as responsive, but in the middle of a learning curve. The owner is a person who is used to managing a commercial property and understands tenants and leasing and all that kind of stuff. So the owner has never been argumentative, hasn't been or has been extremely transparent through the process. She's just slow, which is frustrating, and which is why we've also probably been reluctant to move to the harsh next step of an abatement action, because like Jason said, we do have confidence that she's moving through the process. We just would like it to be faster than what she's doing. It's a pretty harsh step to take the next step. We're not afraid to do that. Jason said the demolition activity, that has a deadline that has come and gone. But as we get introduced to the new contractor, start having the conversations with the contractor, know that it's moving forward. It's not a matter of them ignoring us. It's moving forward. And then there's a January 31st, and I had a little bit of where Jason was at, there's a January 31st deadline of them submitting their redesign, or their design for the redevelopment of the property too. So that's an important milestone for us to achieve as well.
Thanks, Jeff.
So I want to go back really quick just to your comment, Jason. So the contractor that we're looking at now said it'll take about approximately a week to clear out that basement and get everything back in order and smooth the site out?
Yeah, fill the site. They're planning on filling it with gravel, and then kind of up to the perimeter edge, back a sidewalk, and then probably slope it to the center so it doesn't create any drainage concern. So that's the plan. So we will likely see that within the next couple of weeks. And then the next section of the memo is the current status of the redevelopment. As Jeff alluded to, we've been working with the owner to try to answer questions about their conceptual plans to redevelop, and then that Appendix B has some preliminary kind of conceptual plans for what that redevelopment might look like. She has hired, like I say, a design team, an architect, and internally in community development, we've set up a team consisting of a planner, a development engineer, and a building plans examiner. We're all kind of familiar with the project, and we can kind of maintain that consistent point of contact for their design questions to try to help them get a product into us that is going to meet our design standards and code requirements. So we expect that first application for site design review to be coming in before the end of this month, and then civil and building plans to come before the first half of the year in June. And then we've got this timeline established to follow through for our review kind of response times, and move forward with hopefully approval before the end of the year and construction to begin about a year from now on that site.
Councilmember Wills, sorry.
Jeff, is it premature to ask some questions about this redevelopment plan?
I don't think it's premature. We may have, it may be hard to answer some of the questions.
When I looked at the cover sheet, and I'm not an expert at reading these like you are, I see that there's going to be a total of 14 site parking stalls. And when I look at this being a number of stories high and the size of the units, I see more than 14 drivers. What's going to be tell us a little bit about how we're going to accommodate parking.
Well, so part of, it's a great question, and that's part of what the discussions are focusing on right now is what did you have before as a property owner? What were you grandfathered to? And I believe there were 36, maybe 38 dwelling units in that building before. So provided that she meets some of the timeframes for redevelopment, there are some vesting rights that she'll have. But if she wants to do a net increase over the 36 or 38 units, the net increase will have to meet those standards. So, you know, parking is one of those, you know, paying some impact fees, things of that nature that, you know, she has some rights to. And frankly, I mean, even with an expert, someone who is used to developing mixed-use projects, moving through a process to rebuild this structure within a couple of years from the time that you have a design to the time that you're occupying the building, that's a reasonably aggressive schedule. So she is being, even though I know a lot of time, I mean, myself included, I get impatient. I want to see something come back because of the scar that it is right now. But there's a lot of stuff to be dealt with to get it to that point, just in terms of engineering and design and construction.
Well, I appreciate your sympathy. This is one of our Auburn people. I mean, I don't know if they live here or not, but they have their property here. And when it's all said and done, they're ours. And so I appreciate your willingness to kind of work with them, being that they're probably new in this redevelopment area. Has there been any discussion as to what the rental rates are going to be? I just wondered what kind of population and so on and so forth. Okay, demographics.
I think she's still trying to figure that out too, and you know, just the number of units and the population that she'd be serving, and you know, income levels. You know, it's complicated. I think.
Very complicated. Thank you. Thank you.
So the preliminary design, as we looked at, is the comment on page 35 about soils investigation and the potential of what the foundation would look like for this. It's kind of almost impossible, I guess, at this point in time for them to determine that. So we could have a conceptual design that's totally unworkable, or a situation where we know what the Merrill Gardens soils was like, and we have really one parking there. I also know on the other side of Vision where Whalen Arms is, because I did the project there for the Housing Authority, we're going to tear out the slab on the first floor because it was sinking a couple inches a year. Our soils there where it costs by the engineer is the consistency of toothpaste. So we're somewhere between Merrill Gardens and Trek and this building here. So is there any indication at all about how this may play out with this preliminary design? Because it may be totally unworkable at this point in time.
That is a fair series of statements. It's, yeah, there's a lot that, I mean, rebuilding a 100-year-old building and the fact that 100 years ago, buildings didn't have to meet the standards they have to meet now. And, you know, soils is kind of an easy one to pick on. There's a whole bunch of other practical concerns and challenges related to this site. And I would say that's one of 10. So we don't know, and I don't think she knows yet. There's still a lot of reconnaissance that needs to be done.
It's just to the point where if we have to drive piles down into that ground, and piling machines in downtown, and we can wind up in a situation where a project becomes, we can't pencil out.
Yeah.
We're back to square one again with this site.
Right, there's a system that'll work, but is it practical from a financial perspective? That's a different question.
Councilmember Holmes?
100 years ago, when the Heritage Building was built, Auburn was probably a city of 3,000 or 4,000 people, and 13 parking spaces would have been, or street parking would have been more than sufficient. This preliminary shows 5,500 square feet of retail. Her architects have pinned in 5 or 6 retail outlets. Her schematic shows 13 parking stalls for her residents and that retail. Today, we're a city of 80,000 people. I appreciate her vesting in the rights of having owned a 100-year-old building, but we need to work at parking rather than adding to our parking problem in an area that a month doesn't go by that I don't receive a complaint about parking in that part of our city. So grandfathering people in to a city of over 80,000 people, grandfathering them in to when it was a city of 4,000, it doesn't make good sense. I have empathy for the owner who was the victim of a fire, but she was a victim of a fire because she had a 100-year-old building that the fire couldn't be stopped once it started.
Yeah, I will say that the site becomes, it's a small site. I don't know.
It's tiny.
Yeah, it's 10 or 12,000 square feet, and with no real access point on any side of the building. Even on the south side, it's you're entering a city parking lot, which is essentially a privately owned property that we own. And then you have to cross a right-of-way, which is that sidewalk in the back of the building. I struggle with it because I hear what you're saying, and you know, grandfathering, that helps her out, and I don't know if you could build on that property and meet the parking standard. I mean, frankly, I don't, to be able to put 50 stalls in for 50 units, or 25 stalls in for 25 apartments, and put stalls in for the commercial, I don't see how you circulate through that tight of a footprint, because you're gonna have to go multi-story on parking. So it is a puzzle, I'll tell you that.
It truly is. I just don't want to exacerbate our already critical parking downtown.
Councilmember Wales?
I understand the grandfathering provision. I don't recall how many floors the Heritage Building had before it burned, but did it have 4 floors?
It had 2.
Yeah, see, so this is...
2 with no parking.
Yeah.
So, part of the reason that it's proposed for 4 is because of parking on the ground floor, and then it's a weird configuration of floor layouts for units. So if you go to a traditional 2-story, it's probably the easiest thing to do. I mean, I did this right away. Is why just rebuild what you had. Well, the layout of those units in the hallway would not meet modern fire codes and building codes and space code, international property maintenance codes for how big units are. You wouldn't meet that standard today. So we almost, by requiring them to meet modern building codes, we almost push them to the 3rd floor. I mean, when you really sit down and start studying it, you start scratching your head saying, we're forcing them by meeting modern code to go higher.
Well, that's what really alludes to my first question, because when I looked at it, to me, it looked like a rehab center with, for work training program or something, small little units. People didn't have cars, mass transit takes them someplace for training, and that's what I saw. Okay.
If you all recall, when they were doing the Trek building, they found this fuel tank underground. I mean, in those days, and it was probably 100 years they were probably looking at. So, I mean, that was an environmental disaster. So we don't know really what's underground that could crop up and create more problems. I mean, it's gonna, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Jason, and Jeff, for the update, and we look forward to continued discussions on this one. Okay, next we have our downtown development update.
Again, for the record, Jeff Tate, Director of Community Development, and this is another item that Councilmember DeCoursey had suggested would be a good recurring piece of information for all of council to hear about. That's just what's going on downtown. So took a stab at just highlighting 3 of the more high-profile downtown developments, as well as a few of the facade improvement projects, and hopefully the pictures help a lot. So just real quickly, the first page shows the Auburn Apartments, which is the block between Merrill Gardens and Sound Transit Parking Garage. We expect to see that project will go into construction here in about a month to a month and a half. That is a 226 dwelling unit mixed use building. It'll be 7 stories tall, about 300,000 square feet, and will include 251 parking spaces. I think staff's particularly excited to see this building come out of the ground because it looks to be a beautiful, very thoughtfully approached architectural design. It will be unique in the region. It's not something that you will have seen in other cities. And I think that that's a testament to the property owner wanting to find the right fit for downtown Auburn and kind of make a statement. And because they built Merrill Gardens, has some architectural tie-in with the building that they built across the street. That means that in it's probably February, March, that you'll start seeing site prep work over there. And it also means that probably the most notable early piece that you'll see is removal of the Little Red House.
Councilmember Wells?
Are they going to have to put pilings down to support the 7 stories?
What is that? What the foundation system is for that one? The piling, yeah. The second, on page 54, the next project is the Legacy Senior Living project, and that is directly across the street from City Hall. And you can see in the little aerial map next to it, it's kind of an odd configuration of a building, just because that property owner doesn't own the whole city block. So you'll see the City Hall Plaza, and then you'll see Sunbright Cafe kind of tucked into the 2 corners. This is a project that, when it came in to our office, proposed 166 dwelling units, 7-story building, about 5,700 square feet of retail, most of which faces Main Street. They're coming in tomorrow to talk to staff and are proposing probably what will amount to a fairly significant design change. So that, stay tuned in the next report. You're going to see probably a different looking picture than what's proposed in this image to the left. Part of that relates back to their foundation system, access, how they're working out issues with the adjacent property owner. Sunbreak Cafe has probably less to do with city requirements and more to do with practical requirements on the site. And they're looking for probably a little bit more affordable path forward, so it'll probably lead to some changes.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel?
How much of the parking from Daybreak Cafe is going to be taken from this?
I don't know how many spots. So there's parking that Sunbreak has, and then there's parking that's adjacent to the Sunbreak that they own, that I think are used by Sunbreak customers and other customers of other establishments as well. So there won't be any spaces that the Sunbreak owns that are affected, because the Sunbreak has control over those spaces. If the owner wants to approach their neighbor and propose something, that's going to be an agreement between the two of them. But there is an adjacent parking lot that I think, well, it's easy when you drive onto it. You don't know whether you're on the Sunbreak property or you're on these folks' property when you park there.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the 166 dwelling units with 127 parking spaces, does that fall within the parameters of the city code, or are we falling
Yeah.
short?
No, it falls in the parameter, and there are some reductions. This is a senior living development, so the parking standard isn't as high. You'll notice on the prior project that they have a ratio of more than 1 parking space per unit. This is less than 1 parking space per unit. And between the senior nature of it, and then the proximity to Sound Transit Station, and then you actually get a little bit of credit for frontage along the street and the parking that's available there as well. So that's why it's a lower number, but it does meet city code. The next project is True by Hilton, and that's in design. And in the map, you'll see that it's just south of Safeway. That's what that big white box is, just north of the shaded yellow area, Safeway and the Safeway parking lot. And also there, kind of an interesting configuration of parcels, but you may have noticed that about a year ago, the property owner did demo a bunch of old buildings that were there, and that's to make way for this Hilton product. It's a 90-room Hilton hotel, 4 stories, about 40,000 square feet or so, and currently under design review, under building and civil review. And they're really working out some issues with access and adjacent property owners and how to share parking and share access and things of that nature. Because the site there, actually on that block, there's a lot of surface parking that already exists there. So they're working out some issues with those property owners.
I just wanted to make a comment that that's a really strange configuring of how that building's going to be built.
Yeah. It is. You're right about that. They do, I will say, they do have, frontage along, the north, the south, and the east. So they have some different kind of, so when you look at that yellow area, it's kind of hard to envision how does a building fit into that. But you got to take into account that there's not only the building footprint, but you have driveways and some exterior parking. You have some landscaping, things of that nature that will fill in some of that yellow area you can see.
Councilmember Wales?
So, as I look at that, is north on the top or is north to the left?
North's on the top.
Okay.
So the diagonal, just to the south, the diagonal is Cross Street.
Okay.
To the east is Auburn Way.
This is the, okay.
And then, to the north is the road that goes between, this site and Safeway. You think of like where the Spunky Monkey is. That would be just to the west or the left of this yellow box.
Okay.
So where's their office going to be?
It's for them to figure out.
That's going to be really strange too.
Where's the hotel's office?
Yeah.
Oh,
Where's
doesn't
the
matter.
front end of it?
I'll figure that out.
I'm not sure if it's to the
Auburn
west
Way
or
will be
the, what's that?
Auburn Way is the main entrance.
That will be where the main driveway is. It's right off Auburn Way. I just don't know where their office is.
Their
really.
office?
The next page transitions into some facade improvement projects, and your business owners and property owners downtown continue to appreciate council's support for this program, $100,000 of funding annually to provide some exterior improvements to buildings. So one that's complete at the top, Rail Hoppin' Brewery, that's right next to Oddfellas, across the street from Gustav's Manor. And it's kind of hard to pick up on this, but it's in the pictures, but it's really notable out in the pedestrian environment and the experience of the pedestrian. But they swapped out those doors, and the city paid for the windows, not the doors, the windows. And they basically roll up like a garage door. When those are up and it's nice weather and there's activity inside, it just makes the pedestrian experience more enlivened. So $5,000 of city funds that paid for that. They did the labor themselves. The city paid for the windows and the hardware. The next building, the Brecky building, which is kitty corner to the police station across the street from Zola's, where Go Brewing is. So right now you can see that the work is occurring if you drive down Main Street. It's a very active construction site. So I look forward to showing a post-construction picture. Right now what we have is a rendering to the left. So it's going to basically take a 60s or 70s style building, provide some very contemporary treatments to the outside of the building with wood and metal. And then kind of hard to see in this image, but in the photo, notice the white CMU wall to the far right of the image. That wall faces Main Street. And then note in the image that, and you can see this if you drive by now, 3 large openings have been placed in that wall, and windows will be placed in those locations. So it'll, again, enliven the pedestrian experience or driving by instead of seeing a CMU wall.
That's nice.
$30,500 that the city contributed, and then the owner contributed $220,000. The next page is the Dreesen building, which is the law building that is, it's really tucked up against Rainbow Cafe on the rear entrance of Rainbow. So you would enter into Safeway off of A Street at this location. The building just to the left in the image, or north, is where the tax building was and where the city put in facade improvement money to spruce up the appearance of that building as well. So the contractor was just in today picking up final permit for this project, and we'll in the next week or so you'll start seeing some scaffolding and things of that nature go up adjacent to that building and start improving the appearance all the way around it in terms of its color, and adding some little awnings and the cornice at the top of the building. I think that's going to be a nice little architectural feature. It's subtle in this image, but yeah, the window treatments around and the framing around the windows, that'll be a nice little improvement. And that project is likely to take about 10 or 12 weeks, and but it'll be fun to see that one come together. That facade that you see there facing A Street is actually detaching from the building. So the owner, is also putting a significant financial contribution into the structural stability of the building as well. It's not high risk. It's a minor separation, but it's good to be getting the attention on a building of this age, and it's actually the paint and the appearance of the building now are kind of bland, but it's actually quite an attractive building. So anxious to see that turn out as well.
Are those apartments up there, or are those business?
They have been apartments. They're not occupied right now. And there's actually 2 doorways into this building. So the doorway that's a little bit further north, you can barely see on the photo, the far left of that gray building. That's the doorway to go up to the upper unit. So there's 2 apartments up above. And the attorney is using those spaces really for storage and some workspace. And then the last one is Venefra, and it's creating or granting some funding for adding some lighting and an awning at their space out in front of that building. which is hopefully going to not only provide a little protection, weather protection, but also help it stand out a little bit more on Auburn Way. It's a space that sort of struggles to capture the attention of those who are driving by. It kind of just blends in next to the Masonic building, and so the awning is an attempt to try to give it a little bit more presence so that more folks are able to see it.
Councilmember Holman and Councilmember Wells.
Some years back, we had an urban planner on staff who did a project for us and recommended getting away from awnings on buildings. And now we're contributing money to an awning. Now, it may be right for this location, it may be the right thing to do, but we are getting a difference in advice on urban planning, and I don't claim to have any urban planning background whatsoever. It's just that I remember the lessons that we had.
No, I'm glad you asked that question because it is, you're spot on. I mean, that was the message, was awnings can be a detractor, but really there was some other information or messaging kind of wrapped around that position, which really had to do with sort of the pedestrian experience along Main Street. And this building is positioned a little bit differently. We haven't really changed our position because we continue to believe that awnings have limited role in downtown, and that there were a lot of good reasons to not encourage awnings. But it really was about the Main Street piece of people walking up and down Main Street and being able to have that view and have that interface. This space is set back from Main Street, and again, we felt that it was appropriate to look at awnings a little bit different for this building, simply because A, it's off Main Street, and B, that projection, when you're on a relatively high-speed, highly traveled corridor, and you have a building and a building, and you're in the middle, and you have no real way of kind of standing out, that it's a piece that helps with kind of creating some undulation of the facades themselves.
Yeah, I'm looking at the design picture here. It looks nice, but the two lessons are different.
Well, I have the same issue because I took the same class, and they brought in and showed us how they had rehabbed signs and how lighting was important around the window. And they talked about awnings, and my concern is the durability of these awnings. I like awnings, and they had different types of awnings that were out of wood. When they're fabric, they fade. When they're fabric and they have people on the second floor, unlike viniferous, but the other ones where people flick their cigarette butts out and burn holes in them, they end up looking like the awnings outside the Penny's building. So, I think that they look great.
If for whatever it's worth, it's not a fabric awning.
Good. What is it?
It's metal.
Oh, I feel so much better. Because that you can wash the bird stuff off too.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
more
you.
durable product.
Yes, okay, good. Thank you.
Well, I remember when the consultant came in, we were going through some of the scenarios about improvements in downtown and lighting, and I mentioned about the shoe store.
Yeah.
And nobody knew it was a shoe store until they did the redesign with some lighting and some good focus, a few other facade enhancements. And to me, these projects are really emphasizing what that consultant told us. So we're seeing, I call this word pop, we're seeing this thing pop now. You look at the recent building where plain old, ordinary, 100-year-old building, what was fashionable back then, is now going to have this 100-year-old building with a nostalgic look. And I think that's exactly where we decided to go with this, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. So I think we're in my opinion, we're in the right direction, right track. Okay. We're going to see some great looking buildings downtown here. So, yeah.
The lighting on that awning, I see that it still has 3 lightings. How about in the front for as you walk in the door? Like at nighttime, is that gonna be lit up pretty bright so that people can see that as they're driving by at night?
Yeah, so the lighting, there's lighting underneath the awning as part of it.
Oh, okay.
So you'll see some additional lighting that will be incorporated into the city is not paying for the lighting component, but that is part of the project. It will include an illuminated kind of under canopy lighting fixtures so that it won't be a dark place.
Nice.
Okay, any other questions? That concludes our Public Works Community Development section, so we'll turn it back over to Deputy Director Lozer.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we'll take a break until 7 o'clock. And then we'll come back and talk about seating.
Yeah, I walked off with your chart.
What's that?
I walked off with your chart.
Thank you.
Oh, I'd have to look at my calendar. It's just
Not today.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Have to pick our list out today.
Oh, tonight, 8 o'clock.
8, 10, I think, flight scheduled.
How are you?
Thank you. This was a good idea.
question is, will landlords, is however long it drags on, if they don't have their money, what are they gonna do? Because they have a business to run.
Well, people need housing, and that pay the rent would be a voucher. I mean, it seems like this would have been, that's a pretty obvious one to say that.
And if I remember correctly, like in county, the vouchers go through the King County Housing Authority. So I don't know if they're given their allotment up front and King County Housing Authority is distributing those.
Do you think Claude?
Claude would know that. I was just looking here. Let's see. Public Housing Authority made delay payments to Section 8 landlords in January. That was December 29th.
But this kind of stuff happens, right? Let's say something close by had happened.
Housing Choice
Someone said
is funded on a calendar year basis, and that the monthly payments for November and December of 2018 are scheduled to be made timely. The contingency plan does not clearly state where the funding for Section 8 housing programs will come from for January or beyond. Shutdown is still ongoing.
And a beer, usually the two don't go together.
Well, and that's, when you say, does the federal government shutdown impact local government? Well, it does, because any grants that would
Say, hey, we got some masks, so
is due to
oh, it's maybe there's something I don't know about of a
social
I ate all the good
programs,
ones.
funding that we have for social programs.
What are you looking for?
Where's all the candy?
They're all down there, by you. You're the only one that needs to gain a little weight.
So that was on December 29th. Let me see if there's any.
I think they're gonna be arguing scared of many ways, yeah.
If the United States government has shut down most Department of Housing and Urban
See
Development.
anything, John, under finance, technology, economic development that you want to see added to the matrix?
Enclosed
We're getting down to where we can.
accepted activities which are not disrupted.
Genius.
Public housing authorities up and running and ensuring of access to draw down needed funds.
No, tomorrow I go to school all day. Yeah.
Well, I gotta do my walk. I just about broke my ankle this morning.
I saw you limping here a little while ago.
Yeah, my hips. So like I went to therapy and they said they did as much as they can. So now I'm just trying. They give me exercises to do. The rubber band.
Oh, I hate that, yeah. So maybe you need to go to the next level.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I just don't want to bother them here.
I don't know, my husband, did it on,
Yeah, just decomposed.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, but that's what they say. I'm not any medication. I'm not, I haven't broken a bone in my life, so I'm trying to keep that going.
You'd be a perfect candidate, a perfect patient.
I don't know about that.
No, we took care of the identity theft, and the only thing that I would see is, if we want to,
Where do we deal with the theater?
Yeah, we done.
The
I'm not
theater,
sure that's finance.
is that finance? Is
Whoever has
that,
parks should probably,
okay, parks.
Did you go to the HUD website?
So many
HUD
trips.
website says closed.
Well, he says it could go on for a year.
Parks would be Browns.
I don't think his own party is going to let
Would have been working on that one for a year.
much.
Come on.
Even
or you could even put it under Public Works and Community Development.
put the government back for 3
Arts.
weeks, at least extend it for 3 weeks. and let's
Well, it still is municipal service. Oh, arts, arts.
Public Works and Community Development.
Essential work.
Arts, cultural arts is under that.
Like the Coast Guard,
Either one would fit.
TSA. Why the Coast Guard is not part of the other branches of the military.
It's always been that
The only
way.
thing I would like to,
And then they were fighting for years to get
at
this.
some point in time, we need to make a decision. Do we want to move forward with annexing
The airport
one or more of our
is actually
islands
happening,
of
and some of them have had.
Well, they were bothered about they were going to bring some,
this guy.
Shelley was gonna bring some data back to us
That's what it
on
is,
costs
because
and
agriculture
whatever.
And the amazing thing, Shelley's deli
Which is just, you
shows
can't have rule
the
by
residents
radio.
there.
Okay,
pay
we're ready.
A little bit more.
7:00.
A little bit more. And yet, every case that I moved on for 5 years on the boundary review board, their costs went down. Something.
Okay,
Probably
looking
from
at
some of
the
residents over
seating
there,
chart
what do they say about
for this year,
over there.
and the committee, the council sitting committee, of course, was Mr. Baggett, Mr. Holman, Mr. Brown, and myself. And this is what we came up with as a draft. So we put it forward for consideration tonight. So, any discussion?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if I could be replaced with Mr. Brown. And my reasoning was, because I've been sitting in my spot for over 4 years. And so I noticed everyone else has gotten moved several times. And so I was just wondering if I could just be moved just one seat over.
Sounds like a reasonable request.
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I have no problem making that exchange. I still get to sit next to my colleague, Councilmember Trout Manuel, so I'm just fine with that. I do have to sit next to Mr. Holman, though. But I'm not going to complain about that. I'd
Okay.
be honored to sit by both.
Okay, are there any other comments, any other movements that people want to make? All right, seeing none, is the consensus to move Trout Manuel?
Wait, the attorney's raising.
Oh,
For the draft changes, yes, but as a reminder, we'll need to bring it back for a formal
I
motion.
can't, can you speak up?
Yes, just a reminder, we'll need to bring this back for a formal motion next week at a regular business meeting, but for the
Yeah, at the city
draft
council.
stuff we do.
Yeah,
Just getting consensus.
so we're getting consensus like we normally do, no voting.
We're good, thank you.
So everybody looks favorable. All right, then that's what we'll do. And we'll put it on, it'll be on the council agenda for approval at the beginning, right? Right, Mayor? Oh,
I don't know that it matters where it is, your seating can be changed at the next meeting.
So can
Or it
we,
can be
Mr. Attorney, can we change the placards before the next meeting?
That can be done.
Yes.
Musical chair.
Madam Mayor, you're okay with that?
Add a little entertainment.
Yes, Mr. Holman.
Could you provide us with the ad hoc committee's thinking on the arrangement, how you're arranging?
Rationale?
Yeah.
Just movement, generally, just movement. That's all. Friendly movement, and we had, two of them moved around. And that was all, John. No other criteria was used. Enough said on this subject then? Okay, all right. So, other discussion items. I myself have trouble identifying ad hoc committees. I think it would be nice if we, on our council agenda, show the ad hoc committees, show them.
You and I discussed that, it's already going to be put on,
Is that what
on
we
the
talked
council.
about?
Yeah, you asked me about it.
Well, okay, the mayor and I talked about it. It slipped my head. But,
Slipped your head or your mind?
no, I've got chemo between one ear and the other.
Slipped your ears.
There you go, there you
Yeah.
go. So the mayor and I did discuss this, and she was thought it was a good idea too, to do that. Because right now myself, I know we have finance ad hoc, I know we have street opportunities ad hoc.
No, we don't.
No, it's gone.
Oh, it's gone?
We have
Okay, see?
finance.
So. Anyway, all right, any new business? Matrix, let's go to the matrix. Boy, pretty soon we're gonna work ourselves right out of a control matrix. We don't have much. Are there any? Yes, Margot.
I'd like to discuss a couple of items for possible inclusion if it meets the consensus. I'd like to talk about the theater. And I'm not sure if we want to, and then if we do, what area it would go under. And I'd also like to have us have a presentation, if it's the consensus of the group, during one of our study sessions on the Auburn Valley Arts Group. You know, a 10 or 15-minute presentation by that group. And it's arts, and I'm not sure if we're interested, if it should go under cultural arts and public arts, or if it goes under parks and recreation, or where it goes. And then I would also be interested in the Poor Finance and Technology and Economic Development Committee on Tuesday is going to have its one item gone, and it might need to disband because there'll be nothing left here under blue. So we need some more ideas.
John.
Okay, under finance and technology, we have a new director of IT, perhaps a report
Okay.
on status of existing projects, plus desired direction, where you're going to take IT. Just an IT update. And that would go under finance.
Okay.
Would that be, does everybody feel like they can
Yeah.
benefit from that?
I'd like
Good
that,
idea.
yes.
Yes.
Yes, Deputy Mayor, thank you. I was thinking that theater probably would go under municipal services, under parks and recreation, perhaps. And then I would be interested, in perhaps the mayor knows this, but on the solid waste, is it time to start looking at what we're looking at there for future contract consideration, or?
So we should wait on Shelley, follow her lead on that.
Okay.
And also for the theater, that would be under Public Works and Community Development, Cultural Arts and Public Arts.
Okay.
Okay. And with that one, you recommend that we wait until Shelley, or what do you think?
Shelley will bring that to you when there's something ready to be.
Okay. great.
Discuss, okay.
The Auburn Valley Arts Group, that would be probably under municipal services, wouldn't it?
No,
No?
that would be under Cultural Arts and Public Arts.
Oh, you're right, under Mr. Tate.
Do we have a consensus to have a 10 or 15-minute update from?
I'm for it.
Are we
Bob?
talking about the Arts Commission?
No.
No. What-
This is
Auburn Valley Art.
This is a nonprofit art gallery group.
Oh.
Just a quick update on the plastic bag ban, and Director Tate and I discussed this as well, but the state legislature is actually going to be taking up potential legislation on plastic bag ban in the state of Washington with some other associated items along with that. So we're looking at doing this in March, but depending upon what happens in the state, we may or may not be doing this in March. So we may just be coming in with a kind of our own little briefing as to what other cities are doing, but we just have to take the temperature of what happens in the legislature at that time. So.
On the park and recs, what is that under?
Parks and Recs.
Municipal
services.
Have we decided with, I've been thinking about that park that we have named it after Pete Lewis. Have we even talked about what's gonna go there?
So Daryl has it in his budget this year for some improvements up in that area. So that's something that Daryl can provide an update on in an upcoming session, if you want that.
I would, because since I've been going to National Leagues of Cities, we've been seeing and talking a lot about disabled children or even adults being able to go to a park and have access to going around the park. And so I was just wondering if we had even considered anything like that up there, or what he was planning on doing.
So I know that a majority of the improvements, I mean, there's not going to be a lot of active improvements up there. This is more of a passive park area, right? It's not going to have a lot of the amenities. There's not going to be a restroom built up there. This is more that lake. It's like a 2-acre lake, right? So there'll most likely be trails put around the lake and that type of thing. Not sure exactly what the extent of those improvements are yet, but Daryl can provide you an update on that.
That would be good.
Anything else, folks?
Do you want to tell me about?
Mayor, how do we want to schedule these for the next, for a study session?
Well, if you will allow us at the directors' meeting to go back and identify how much time is required for putting together that type of information, then we can provide you with potential dates.
I'd like to just recap what we talked about. The theater, parks, Auburn Valley Arts Group, community development, IT, the new director, and then the West Hill Park. It's parks and rec as well.
I'd like to see when he does the West Hill one, that he just kind of recaps what he's doing down there on 104th. They've got some plans for that too. We've seen some schematics. We could probably share both of them with us.
So we just had a report on 104th.
Uh-huh.
A couple of weeks ago, or?
It was longer than that, but spring is coming and maybe they've...
I think it might be too soon to have another report, Largo.
Okay, or we can ask him and see what he wants to do too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk to Daryl and get it.
Well, Nancy can share that with them in the directors' meeting and figure out if they want to include it or not.
All right, that's a good idea. Yes.
The mayor has just shared with me that on the council metrics for domestic violence advocacy report, the date is going to be April 8th.
Anything else? Anything else? All right. Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.